Good evening. Coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for Thursday, July 11th, 2019. Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby is calling for the decriminalization of marijuana on a federal level. She's here to tell us why. A black woman was forced by flight attendants to wear a blanket to get on the plane. No, she was not nude. She'll tell her story. Is Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi deliberately targeting the freshman House members of color? AOC and representing members of the squad says yes. Senator Kamala Harris has a plan to close the rape kit backlog. And the D.C. mayor says Trump's 4th of July celebration has emptied the Terrorism Security Fund. Plus, as you can imagine and expect, another crazy-ass white person. So I'm Greg Carr, sitting in the seat for Big Brother Roland Martin, who's on travel right now, going somewhere around the world, and it is time to bring the funk on Roland Martin Unfiltered. As he would say, let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time, and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
In a testimony before a congressional panel yesterday, Baltimore State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby said that her city is a prime example of how the war on drugs has failed. She joins us now to talk about why she believes that marijuana should be decriminalized on a federal level. State's Attorney Mosby, are you there?
I am here. How are you today?
Well, better now that you've joined us, and thanks as always for your continuing work on behalf of not only our people, but all the citizens of Baltimore, and for the example. So you were here in the district to testify before Congress, this subcommittee, on this issue of decriminalizing marijuana and doing it on a federal level. Could you walk our viewers through why not only this is an important issue, but how you're distinguishing between what you're already doing on the ground there in Maryland and what you really want the feds to do?
So I was honored to be invited to the subcommittee of the Judiciary, and it's the Crime and Terrorism and Homeland Subcommittee, and it was chaired by Karen Bass of California, who convened this hearing, and it was about racial justice, marijuana laws in America, and racial justice and the need for reform. And I was honored because it gave me an opportunity to kind of talk about the discriminatory enforcement of laws against poor Black and brown people. We know that this war on drugs that Congress signed off on has really been a war on poor Black and brown people. And essentially, it has been at the disservice and the disadvantage to our communities. And so I was given the opportunity to address Congress. I had several sort of proposals. And one of those proposals is I'm advocating for not just the decriminalization, but the legalization of marijuana federally. And that's for a number of reasons. Right now, federally, it's against the law. The Controlled Substances Act says that you cannot be, it's a Schedule I narcotic right next to heroin, which in and of itself is a problem because it's not as, dangerous as that type of drug. But it's a Schedule I narcotic, and you have 11 states who have already legalized marijuana, and that's a conflict of interest. And furthermore, the issue that I saw in this was that we have to allow the states to regulate, tax, and to be able to make the determination about what to do with marijuana laws. And the reason I say this is because with the regulation of marijuana, it diminishes the black market or the distribution of marijuana. We know that distribution of drugs fuels violence. And you look at my city, unfortunately, Baltimore is woven within the fabric of the United States. And yet we're lead in per capita homicides. We lead in the number of opioid deaths, you know, and we're one of the most impoverished cities in the entire country. And a lot of that has to do with this failed war on drugs. And so what I went up to Congress to say was, you all are somewhat responsible for these federal and financial incentives that you have provided to the states to enforce these laws in discriminatory ways. We know that nationally, that you as an African American or a Black person, you are 4 times more likely to be arrested for the possession of marijuana than a white person. That's problematic because we know that the use and consumption of marijuana among Black people and white people are the same. And yet, and still, even after the decriminalization of marijuana, in the city of Baltimore, 95% of those citations that they issue for marijuana for 10 grams or less are going to Black people. 42% of the citations that they're issuing citywide is going to 1 out of 9 police districts, which represents 9% of the population within the city and is 95% Black and disproportionately poor. So when you look at those stats, what that tells you is that there has been discriminatory enforcement that has had collateral consequences, not just on individuals, but on whole communities. And recognizing that, what I went to Congress to say was that you now have a responsibility, understanding that this was a failed war on drugs, to reinvest not only in individuals through reentry services and ensuring that we have mass expungement and vacatur and consider the resentencing, that we've treated this, what should be a public health crisis, as it criminalized it. But I also argue that we should also be reinvesting in our communities in ways in which we're the ones that have suffered the most at the hands of these failed policies.
Well, you haven't, you certainly haven't waited on Congress to act. It seems to me that you're following in a long tradition of Black state's attorneys in Baltimore. I remember when Kurt Schmoke, who was, I think, that at that time the youngest state's attorney elected in Maryland, really began that conversation about legalizing some use of drugs. But you, in January, covered here on Roland's show, you said, I'm going to stop prosecuting folks for this possession. And then you've even gone into court and asked that records be expunged, that the number of years between the time you've been convicted of something and the expungement be shrunk. I mean, so you're not waiting on Congress to act, are you?
No, I'm not going to wait on Congress, and I'm not going to wait on the state to act either. And that's the point, right? Like in January, I came out, they haven't changed the possession laws, and they have not ensured that they're making that investment in our communities. They're giving me issues about vacating the 5,000 convictions. But I came out in January and said, in considering this discriminatory enforcement, as a state's attorney, I can never be complicit in the discriminatory enforcement against poor Black and brown people, of laws against poor Black and brown people. And so I'm not going to prosecute the possession of marijuana. And I'm going to move to vacate the convictions of over 5,000 individuals. And I argue that it was violative of the 14th Amendment for this discriminatory enforcement, the Equal Protection Clause. And the courts have come back and said, no, you don't have a legal mechanism to be able to vacate these convictions. So I'm still fighting, which is one of the reasons why I went to Congress to say, hey, we need federal incentives to make sure that the states put in their, ensure that they are fighting for the individuals that have been most impacted. The fact that in the state of Maryland, there's an expectation that you have to wait 4 years before you can get your record expunged for the possession of marijuana when it's no longer even a crime for 10 grams or less is ridiculous. And so, that's what Congress has the power to be able to do, is to incentivize the state through their financial means. They incentivize the states through their financial means when they enforce these laws. You have, grants and task forces that were implementing these laws against poor Black and brown people. Now it's incumbent on them to also incentivize the states to right the wrongs of the past.
It's funny. I remember election night 2012. We were covering the stuff at Howard, and I was in an auditorium full of students. And they saw the marijuana leaf come up on the screen, and everybody started cheering, realizing that Colorado had become a state that had legalized marijuana for recreational use. And of course, we know that Washington State did that as well, as you said. But you made a 10th Amendment argument before Congress the other day. For the viewers who might not be clear about the relationship between the states and federal government when it comes to these laws, here in D.C., for example, it's decriminalized, but don't be called it a federal park, like national parks, because that's where federal law occurs. Why did you bring up the 10th Amendment for folks who might not understand the relationship between state law and federal law when it comes to this issue?
Well, because this is the distinction, right? And this is why I'm saying that there should be legalization, not just decriminalization of marijuana. We have to legalize it because the federal government right now is saying that it's illegal. However, there are some certain states, as you've mentioned, Colorado, Washington State, where they're saying it is legal, right? And that in and of itself is a conflict. And it becomes a conflict and issue when it comes to banking issues for those that are in the industry, the marijuana industry. And what we're saying is that we can't have, technically the federal government can go into the state of Colorado and arrest people, even though people are complying with state law. And so that in and of itself is a conflict. And what we're saying, and what I argued, is that we need to eliminate that conflict, and the federal government shouldn't have oversight. It should be up to the states. We should treat marijuana the same way that we treat alcohol, allow the states to regulate and to tax. It's better for the states to be able to control from a public safety and consumer safety perspective, to be able to make a determination as to, what restrictions they're going to put on marijuana, what are the, dispensaries and young people having to come in and to show IDs. You have your quality control testing of the substance so that it diminishes the black market. Right now in the black market, marijuana is being laced with other sort of substances, right? We want to diminish that. And that's what we're saying. And that's what I was arguing to Congress, is that, hey, we have to ensure that we don't have these conflicts that are violative of the 10th Amendment.
Well, State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, every time we see you, always thank you for continuing to fight on behalf of us. And as a proud graduate of Tuskegee University, well, you're a graduate of Tuskegee. My mom was born about 30 minutes from there. Every time I think about how, no question. It ain't just HU, it's TU, Mother Tuskegee, as we say. So thanks again, State's Attorney Mosby, and please keep us informed as the fight moves on, and keep the fight on.
And I anticipate, and I hope they will have bipartisan support, and we get the kind of federal incentives and resources that are needed for the states to comply and to rectify what has been a wrong against poor Black and brown people. So thank you for your support, and I appreciate you.
We're here always. Thank you again.
All right.
Yes, so we've heard from State's Attorney Marilyn Mosby, and we're going to turn now to our panel, our regular panel, including Quadrica Driscoll, who is an adjunct professor at the George Washington University, and Erica Savage Wilson, host of Savage Politics. Well, not only decriminalizing, but legalizing marijuana. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Quadrica or Erica, who's jumping?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'm very curious about is, because this has not been really parceled out for states to settle, what is the communication between different states' attorneys about how to handle those individuals that are being incarcerated, being arrested? Because I'm still believing that Black and brown folks are still paying the penalty for being users or sellers of a drug that has definitely enriched our non-people of color community. And also, there are degrees that people can now begin to pursue in the study of marijuana. So as these, different wealth opportunities come available, I'm just wondering the conversation between states' attorneys about how we can kind of right the wrongs that still are felt among Black and brown communities.
That's very interesting. That's going to inject itself properly into this presidential election cycle. Quadrica, I'm thinking, Prof, about some of the things that happened in California. I know after it was legalized, for example, or decriminalized, in the Bay Area, for example, these very people who have been arrested for drug sales now don't have the capital to rent a storefront, to get a loan, to get into the now legitimate business of selling marijuana. And we heard Attorney Mosby talk about this. Where do you see the future of this going? Or is there a future even for our people who used to be hand-to-hand herb hustlers, and now they can't get out here and get a license to do it legitimately?
I mean, it's dare I say, it's the same shit done over again, right? It always starts where we are poor Black and brown people are always behind the eight ball. Yes. Because now what we do know is that we have our white brothers and sisters who are making bank off of this.
Right.
The former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, is a senior policy advisor for one of the largest cannabis companies in the country.
I would have expected that alcohol was his drug of choice, but I guess that's for consumption, not profit. Anyway,
We talk about morals and society, right?
Price drink wine, I'm sure they tell you that.
Exactly. The reality is, our people have, unfortunately for various reasons, have had to use marijuana to survive and then to sell, including members of my own family, dare I say, right?
No question.
And so here we are now talking about decriminalizing marijuana. There have been a large number of black and brown people who have been jailed in prison.
That's exactly right.
For this. And now it's a huge money maker. I wouldn't be surprised if it's going to be on the stock exchange soon, right?
Well,
And
let
so-
me ask you, do you have any thoughts about the fact that our brother Sean Carter seems to have jumped into this pool? Jay-Z
Jay-Z,
is
right,
now
absolutely.
in this. I mean, where should we come down on this?
I think it is most incumbent that black and brown folks, as you just mentioned, brother, are afforded the opportunities to make the money that really has been paid with time and being
Like,
time.
how you do that?
Exactly.
Absolutely. And so I think, like, for folks that have attained a certain wealth status, to go in and kind of clear the field the same way we've seen them, and I'm saying them meaning like folks like, you mentioned Sean Carter, to go in and kind of clear the field the same way they have done with when they've seen injustices done with other families, to also clear the field in that way, because he himself, he's talked and rapped about, I'm a loyal fan of his, about, you selling drugs
No question.
and using that money in order to bring his career to fruition. So I think that clearing the field in that way so that black and brown folks who have paid the penalty with time away from their family, harsh prison sentences, are able to benefit legally by way of having dispensaries, have those storefronts that are set up like, was demonstrated in Oakland, to be able to go out and pioneer those spaces.
And just to add to that, furthermore, I teach part-time at George Washington, but I'm a healthcare lobbyist by day.
Yes, sir.
And so
Yes, sir.
we also need to talk
And we heard her
about
talk about the opioid crisis.
The opioid crisis
That's
and
exactly
the medical
right.
benefits
Yes, sir.
that are associated
Yes, sir.
with moderate amount of cannabis or marijuana use.
Absolutely.
Right? When you look at chronic conditions like psoriasis, which is not a skin disorder, it's an autoimmune, right? When you look at certain psychological disorders, mental illness, there are studies that have done and show that marijuana is a soothing, calming effect when done, of course, in moderation and with the proper dosage, right? So there are multiple reasons to decriminalize.
So it sounds like maybe, our colleagues and friends at Meharry Medical College, Morehouse School of Medicine, Howard University Medical School, we're going to need some research studies to get behind it. Black institutions need to be thinking a little bit more strategically.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Particularly as they're, the attempt, and they're not gaining the numbers that they need to in terms of funding. I totally agree with you, Dr. Carr, that these are different avenues that they can look to can really expand and really gain
Let's
more.
get after it. And like you said, we can make some money. I know one of the supporters of Roland Martin Unfiltered, he's some sisters getting us to invest in some hemp farming. So pay attention to these ads as we see on Roland Martin Unfiltered. So let's go to our next story. We've got some, I would say people of color, but since white people have color too, we'll just say some non-white congresswomen who are in the United States Congress, who seem to be engaged in a bit of a dust-up. New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, our sister from the Bronx, has accused House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of singling out newly elected women of color, newly elected non-white women, I'd say, in the Democratic Party. She's referring to the 4 freshmen who are known as the Squad. All of them, one way or another, have been interviewed, either covered on this show or talked to directly. And that, of course, is Ayanna Pressley from Massachusetts, Ilhan Omar, of course, of Minnesota, and Rashida Tlaib, who took over John Conyers' seat coming out of Detroit and Michigan. Pelosi has had, of course, denied it. Of course she has. And wants to keep the family business in the family. What do you all make of not only these 4 known as the Squad, and I tell you, I love their style. You can't, whatever else, you may not agree with them politically, but they are not going to be quiet. What is Pelosi's play here? What's her strategy of now beginning to heighten these things and say, well, there are only 4 votes. They don't represent anybody, as though only 4 people voted for them in their districts. What is Pelosi trying to accomplish by taking them on in the public sphere?
Pelosi is trying to maintain power.
Okay.
She is the Speaker of the House. She is the leader of the Democratic Party, right? Facto or de jure, de facto. She is trying to keep her base in line, and she's not going to be upstage by a 20-some-year-old who can't afford to pay her rent in, right, in D.C.
Yes.
Fundamentally. And she is trying to make sure that her caucus stays in line. And in some ways, I kind of agree with her. I think AOC is, I appreciate the spirit that she brings to Congress. I appreciate the 4 women in the spirit that they bring in Congress.
No question.
But I also think she's out of control.
In what way?
I think she is out of control. Out of control.
The Green New Deal is out of control. Policy is out of control.
I think.
I'll say this. So, having read the op-ed that Maureen Dowd did in New York Times,
say some more about that to the viewers, because they may not know.
So, if anybody, for your reading pleasure, I would encourage you, implore you to please pull up a piece that was done over the weekend, Nancy Pelosi with Maureen Dowd of the New York Times. It was staged. They were sitting down, eating, popping chocolates, just having a genteel, kind of setting. And so it kind of took me back, just framing it, thinking about antebellum, 2 women sitting on the veranda. This is what I got because of the language that was used in talking about. And I take offense to them being called the squad. They are 4 duly elected representatives that serve their people in the United States Congress.
And all you have to do, if you want to see how prepared they are, turn on C-SPAN.
Please do.
And watch them on financial services.
Please do.
Watch them on judiciary.
Yes.
They are no more prepared.
No more prepared.
But anyways,
4 women of color who were duly elected, who are absolutely speaking truth to power. I applaud and love and champion each and every one of them, because though Speaker Pelosi does have the power of the gavel, the only reason she had it is because a group of people, meaning the American people, went to the ballot box, not all Democrats, that said, hello, we want a check on this president. So since you said that you're going to give that to us, then we are going to vote for you to do just that. And she reneged on that. And that also brought in new people as well, new blood. These women have been running a race for a very, very long time. So while they've only been in Congress for about a year, these women have been activists in their community for many years. So to not, take them away from what they've done since they've been in the House, these women have been doing that type of work in the streets.
And they're not the only. This is the interesting thing about it as well. Lucy McBath is coming out of Georgia.
Absolutely.
There are a number of
You have
2
Lauren
sisters who are
Underwood in Illinois.
Lauren Underwood out of Illinois.
So there are other women who have been doing the same thing.
So why
they're
these
not
4?
making as much noise.
Well, here's the thing.
But I'm not convinced. And I applaud their work and I love their energy, but I'm just not convinced the good noise, right? John Lewis talks about if you're going to fight, make it a good
And
fight,
you would
right?
use John Lewis as the example, brother. The most effective member of that's tongue firmly planted in cheek.
But in terms of what he does, his fight is effective. His
Is he now?
He's my congressman.
Okay, I'm not mad at him. He's a Civil War hero. I'm sorry, civil rights hero. I shouldn't say.
If you read that piece prior to the topic that we're specifically discussing, you will see Nancy Pelosi refer to them as these people. You will see the language in there that is very isolating, that is really saying to them, listen, y'all sit down, y'all have a seat. So as to say to a black woman, since I am a black woman and I understand the microaggressions, I understand the
and Dowd and Pelosi have a relationship. This whole distinction between brie and sausage and everything they're talking about in there.
Absolutely.
But fortunately, because I'm getting in my ear that we have been joined by our big brother. So I think we can go directly to another part of the world and bring into this conversation the host of Roland Martin Unfiltered to bring the funk. Is that Roland Martin? In all
hey, Greg, what's happening?
Brother, you got to loan me that Koofy man and that dashiki. It's good to see you, brother.
Good to see you as well. Thanks for holding it down. I'm here in Nassau, Bahamas, of course, Global United Fellowship. First of all, let me just say this here. Glad y'all are sitting here having this conversation. So I'm here with Bishop Neil Ellis. I'm going to talk to him in just a second. I do want to weigh in on this whole deal here. The reality is this here. I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is absolutely correct. The Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, she needs to watch her tone. Let me be real clear. Tone. White folks have a tendency to talk to black folks a certain way, talk to people of color a certain way. And so I think in some ways Nancy Pelosi is jealous of the amount of attention that Ocasio-Cortez is getting as a result of her ascension to Congress. And so she also sort of wants to keep them in place. But the reality is, as I said, they were elected to be the kind of leaders they are being. That's what young bucks do. That's what freshmen are supposed to do. If you look at what happened on the Tea Party side, when you had new freshmen who came in, they were rambunctious. They were the exact same way. They would utilize their power. And so when Nancy Pelosi needs to be very careful, because this is the key. Nancy Pelosi can raise a lot of money. Nancy Pelosi cannot drive folks to the polls. Ocasio-Cortez went to Kansas with Senator Bernie Sanders. They went to places where Democrats have not done well. And so she must be extremely careful because they understand the power of young voters, the power of voices who have not been involved in politics. And that's the mistake that I believe Speaker Pelosi is making when she is so dismissive. She can say, look, I have great respect for all of our members. There are folks with different perspectives. My job as Speaker of the House is to pull all of those voices together. She needs the moderates who frankly come from a lot of red districts or red-leaning districts. She needs those progressive voices as well. But I think it is a grave mistake on the part of Nancy Pelosi to be so disrespectful and the tone that she uses with these freshman members of Congress. And so to throw those 2 cents in. We're going to go to a commercial break right now. When we come back, we're going to chat with Bishop Neil Ellis here from the Bahamas about this fellowship, what it means for the future of the Black church. That's next on Roland Martin Unfiltered. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. All right, folks, they're back. MarijuanaStock.org has another great investment opportunity. If you were lucky enough to invest in the last crowdfunding campaign, you know they raised a lot of money in just a few months. Yes, investing in legal marijuana farms. Those initial investors now own shares of a publicly traded company. And, of course, they're excited by that. Now they have a new investment opportunity that is as good, if not better, than the last. I'm talking about industrial hemp CBD. For those who don't know, the hemp plant is a cousin to marijuana, of course, and then it has a higher concentration of CBD, which means hemp CBD gives you all of the medical benefits of marijuana without getting you high. Now, until recently, hemp farming was practically illegal in the U.S., heavily regulated by the DEA. However, that changed with the 2018 Farm Bill, making it legal to grow hemp CBD in the U.S. and creating one of the largest commodities worldwide. They need land to grow all of the plants, and this makes for an incredible investment opportunity. And that's where our good friends at 420 Real Estate come in. Their business model is simple. They buy land that supports hemp CBD grow operations and lease it to licensed, high-paying tenants. That's right, they are hemp CBD landlords, and you can get in on the action. You can invest in this crowdfunding campaign for as little as $200 up to $10,000. All right, folks, all you got to do is go to marijuanastock.org. That's marijuanastock.org if you want to get in the game. And if you do so, do it now. Hey, folks, you might recall when American Airlines had to apologize to Tamika Mallory, the activist, for being thrown off of an airplane that led to the NAACP asking black folks not to have caution flying American Airlines. You might remember we were at their national convention last year in San Antonio where the CEO of American Airlines came there to apologize and to announce the training that all American Airlines employees are going to go through. Well, now they have another issue. The black woman, a doctor from Houston, was flying, and a couple of flight attendants felt that her attire was improper. They actually asked her to cover up. She took photos of her attire. Folks got a chance to see it. As a result, American Airlines has since apologized to her. Joining us right now is Dr. Tisha Rowe. Doctor, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Glad to have you on the show. American Airlines was supposed to take all their employees through sensitivity training, but here we have more African Americans like yourself who are complaining about, again, being pulled off by flight attendants. Were you shocked to have these flight attendants question your attire?
I was shocked. I was insulted. I was confused. There was absolutely nothing hanging out. I looked at myself front and back in the restroom just prior to boarding the flight, and I had no issue with my attire.
And so did they give you something to cover up, or were you eventually allowed onto the plane wearing what you wore?
I had to cover up with a blanket in order to board the plane.
And I assume that was extremely embarrassing to you, having to walk on the plane with a blanket around you. And you're probably looking at other passengers saying, why did she have to cover up?
Exactly. That's exactly what happened. I was humiliated. I spoke to another passenger who was also traveling with her child, different body type. She was much thinner than I was. And she looked at my outfit and said, wow, your shorts are longer than mine. They didn't say anything to me.
Do you believe that, again, to your point about body type, that black women being and you have, first of all, two flight attendants, were they both white?
No, they were black. Both flight attendants were black. I've gotten that question.
So two black women, so two black women, two black flight attendants question your attire.
Absolutely. And we don't know where the question came from. Did it come from the pilot who was Caucasian? Did the complaint come from a Caucasian passenger? So I think a lot of people want to focus on the race of the flight attendants, which is irrelevant because you have discrimination even within our own communities. If someone's working at a country club and they happen to be African American, do they treat all of the African American customers the same as the white? Not necessarily. I mean, how did we as slaves get here?
So the flight attendants never told you where the complaint originated from?
Never even told me that there was a complaint, to be honest. What they said was, do you have a jacket? And if we want to just assume my attire was inappropriate, which it absolutely was not, let's say it was inappropriate in their eyes. The way they treated me as a customer, irrespective of my attire, was as if I had, as so many people assume, rode on a buddy pass, that I was begging for a free ride. They were cold. They were hostile. They were demeaning. God forbid someone is actually inappropriate, you still would not treat them that way. So racism was at play, sexism was at play. It was just horrible.
So, Dr. Rowe, American Airlines apologized to you. What more did they say they're going to do?
They have said they're going to refund me, which is interesting because I've gotten over and over again, have you been refunded? Have you been refunded? And, based on the questions, I kept checking my bank account looking for this refund. The Washington Post told me that American Airlines told them a refund was issued on July 1st, which would have been the day following my flight. And I received today a check dated July 10th. So there's definitely some discrepancy there, a check that will not be cashed.
Well, certainly American Airlines has some answers that they need to give, and also those flight attendants should also be stating where this complaint originated from, because if it came from them, they got some questions to answer. If it came from a passenger or the pilot, they too have some questions to answer as well. Dr. Rowe, we're certainly glad you could join us to share your experience with this flight, and hopefully this will lead to some changes with American Airlines.
Definitely hope so.
All right. Dr. Tisha Rowe, we certainly appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Have a nice night. Bye-bye.
All right, folks. I am here in Nassau, Bahamas for the 6th Annual Global United Fellowship Conference, the gathering taking place. Presiding bishop is Bishop Neil Ellis, representing churches from around 40 different countries. And he joins me right now. And Bishop, glad to see you. Looking good here?
Well, I'm glad to have you here in the Bahamas. Hey, it's better here, they say.
Well, I got to ask you, we'll just slide this way over here. Sure. So let me ask you this here in terms of this is 6 years old. You were previously a part of the Full Gospel Baptist Fellowship. And then there were folks who had issues with you taking over, and you said, you know what, okay, fine. Y'all can have this party to yourself.
Well, let me just first of all tell you, I have very little to no regrets. The 20 years I spent in Full Gospel, all of those years really helped to prepare me for what I'm doing now. 7 years ago, I thought I was going to be ascending to the leadership. It didn't quite work out that way. And almost a year later, the Lord led us in this direction. And here we are, 5.5 years later, and God has blessed the work tremendously. We started out with 42 churches. Now we are just over 1,400 churches in 42 countries.
One of the issues that jumps out, obviously, that we're still dealing with, is we're a different world. I was sitting in one of the panels that was called "Size Doesn't Matter," and all across the United States, you have pastors who are going away from the large facilities, who are now going to multiple smaller facilities to serve the needs of their members, because a lot of people aren't interested in driving long distances to one particular church, and so that's now changed how church is now being done.
Right. One of the things we've spent a lot of time focusing on this week, Roland, is one, what is a healthy church? And we have to come to grips with the fact that the culture of the church has changed. And yes, people no longer want to wait in line in the parking lots for an hour trying to get out. The whole culture's changed. And so I would almost go as far as to say to you, within the next 5 to 6 years, the season of the mega church would have come to an end.
And first of all, we're only talking about 4% of all churches anyway. So it's not like mega churches comprise, half of all churches. It's only 4%.
Yeah, about 95% of all churches in America have less than 300 people on Sunday morning. And then of course with the birth of streaming and the networks where people can stay at home and watch you live while you are in service, of course, that does not help to build attendance anyway. But the goal ought to be getting the message out as not as much as getting the people in.
Let's talk about relevance, because when you look at one of the things that we talked about, that Pastor Jamal Bryant and I have had this conversation. He's going to be speaking later tonight, that the Black Lives Matter movement, that was the first major movement that existed in the United States that was not led by the Black church. And so therefore, a lot of people, they are turned off by this rigid hierarchy. They're turned off by this rigid view of the Bible as well. Do you believe that part of the reason people are not attending church the way they used to is because they don't see the church being fully involved in the social, political, and economic issues that confront them?
Well, if you're asking me, quite frankly, if the church is as relevant as I would like to see it, the answer is no. I think we have to pay attention with the change in times with succeeding generations. And this particular generation that we're in are driven more and more by projects as opposed to programs. So if all we are doing is becoming a programmatic ministry, they're not going to be attracted to that. And they're not going to stay around that. But if they see you reaching outreach and projects and doing things to help your brothers and sisters, and the church becomes a more socialized and take a more socialized approach to ministry, you will have more of this generation participating. So we've got to understand, while the message never changes, the method of how we package and deliver the message has to change with the change in times.
Earlier today, when you were at the news conference, you said that you want to break this spirit of poverty. Explain that to folks who are watching.
Unfortunately, Roland, there are too many of our church leaders and our churches who are struggling. And so while they may have an anointing to do something, and they may have the people to get it done, they don't have the resources. Well, the fact of the matter is, if God has given us assignment, he has made provision somehow for us to get the resources to fulfill the assignment. What we have to do is tap into the principles that God has laid down for us way back in the days of the scripture. And if we tap into the principles, then I believe we have a greater opportunity of breaking this demon of poverty. And for me, that's what it is, because there's no way you're supposed to have an assignment from God, and the only way you cannot fulfill the assignment is because you lack the financial resources. I believe if God gives you a vision, he makes provision, but he's a God of principles. And we've got to go back to scripture and learn how to be driven by the principles as opposed to trying to fulfill the mandate by our own skills and intellect.
Also, I believe look, my wife is ordained minister 24, 25 years now, education minister. And one of the things that my experience that I've also seen is that part of the problem that you have here is that you have insulated churches where there are internal conversations. If you ask a lot of pastors, when is the last time they literally took their members out of the church building and actually had them, let's say, target a mile radius around their church? I would dare say more than 90% haven't done that in a very long time. And I think, again, if people never actually see the body of Christ at work, then there'll be no interest in actually showing up at that church.
Yeah. What I think needs to happen now, Roland, is churches has to develop partnerships within their communities. Not only will it take them out of the walls of the church,
No charcoal grills are allowed.
I'm white. I got you, Carl.
Illegally selling water without a permit
On my property.
Whoa! Hey! I'm uncomfortable.
We have been interrupted a bit by the satellite feed, so we're going to move from those who are praying for us to some people we should probably be praying for. Crazy ass white people. A video was posted showing the general manager of a Burger King confronting two old white women after they berated him for speaking Spanish inside the restaurant, since I guess these old white women didn't realize that there is no national official language in America. Well, let's watch it. Here's what happened.
Go back to Mexico if you want to keep speaking Spanish. Go back to your Mexican your state, your country.
Guess what, ma'am? I'm not Mexican. I'm not Mexican, but you're being very prejudiced, and I want you out of my restaurant right now.
I'll finish my meal and then I'll.
You know what? I'll do it for you, ma'am. I'll call the cops and have you trespassing me. It'll be easier for me. It'll be easier for you to have people like you, so ignorant and disrespectful.
We are ignorant.
You're very ignorant and disrespectful. Have a great day and get out of my restaurant.
Don't worry,
Go.
This isn't your restaurant.
Yes, it is, ma'am.
It is not.
And it is, actually, as a matter of fact, it is. I hate to say
Wow.
it, but it is.
Wow.
And you know what? The owner of this franchise is Mexican. His name is
Oh,
Guillermo Morales.
They always speak English.
No, they don't. He does not. You're very inconsiderate and you're very rude. So, get your business somewhere else. Get your business somewhere else.
You don't know how to act by round of people.
Excuse me, you're telling me not to speak my native language? You're being really prejudiced, ma'am. You're being really prejudiced.
I didn't tell you. I said you should speak it
You know what?
around here.
I have nothing to say to you, ma'am. Just have a nice day, and they'll come back.
Don't worry, we won't.
I'm glad you won't.
Crazy ass white people. brother, why? Well, it seems like it's always Florida, but what do you make of that? Speak American English.
Right.
Which is not British English, to be sure, but I'm not sure they could make the distinction in Florida.
American English is, but
American English is the stuff that says instead of the telly and the loo and the lift, says the bathroom and the elevator, bro.
I mean, the manager was actually on point. This is ignorance. It's stupidity. It's bigotry. We've seen this before. You know, Du Bois asked the question at the turn of the century, how does it feel to be the problem?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And clearly that problem has expanded to not just include black people, but it's people of color, it's people who speak a foreign language, it's people who wear a turban, it's people who call God by Allah, right? So they're all problems. And unfortunately, it's another day in America.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, when we look at this, I'm thinking about it in the context of the things that have been going on in the last 48 hours. We saw Mike Pompeo saying that the United States is now looking into getting into a conversation about what constitutes a human right.
Human right, right.
Today, just before we went on the air, Trump was in the called a press conference and trotted out Bill Barr to talk about ways to get around adding the citizenship question to the census. I mean, all of these conversations that these two women clearly are caught up in some ways in terms of the cultural gesture, speak to this ability they think they have to define who's an American.
It always speaks to the privilege they've had.
You said.
Absolutely.
I don't have it anymore.
Well, we know that the country is turning, right?
Right.
And they are fearful of that.
So they're not crazy, they're scared.
And so they're absolutely
scared. White
people. People are scared. They're scared and they're crazy.
Scared and crazy.
But things that we are afraid of drive us.
But what's the fear?
The fear is
What are we going to do to them?
The fear is we're not going to do anything with it.
Right. Where's the history that we ever did?
We want our own citizenship. We want our own rights. We want what's the Constitution say? Liberty, peace, happiness, justice, pursuit of happiness.
No, maybe I shouldn't say we could.
So,
I'm thinking, what about our Spanish-speaking kin here in this country? Because I'm thinking now about the Contra Chomps a few years ago when they wanted folks to sing the so-called national anthem in English and not Spanish. They were singing it in Spanish, and it bothered them. First of all, why are you singing about Fort McHenry in Spanish in the first place? But let's set that aside. You're demonstrating patriotism. Is there something about immigrants from the Spanish-speaking community? Well, I shouldn't say immigrants, because some of these folks, the border crossed them. They didn't cross the border. They've been here 500 years.
Exactly.
But what is it about Spanish-speaking countries that has triggered this kind of? Because we're seeing this over and over again, brother.
But the thing is, Dr. Carr, it's not just Spanish-speaking countries. It's people are scared of the other. Anybody or anything that they are not familiar with, that they feel is intruding on their space, and that's the problem here. In their psyche, it's a psychosis. They feel as though Spanish speakers, Arabs, Muslims, black people, etc., are impeding on their country. Hence, make America great again. Right? So it's this narrative. Trump is the catalyst for all of this to take place.
He's peeled it back. It was there, but he's given them.
It's always been there. Let's be very clear, but he's fueling this. And we see this playing out with older white women. And the manager he was even Mexican. He was Puerto Rican.
Yes.
He is a United States citizen. So again, it's the ignorance and it's the fear that's driving them to be crazy.
Well, Quadricos Driscoll, who is one of our regular panelists, thank you, brother, for riding with us tonight. We had a little bit of signal difficulty, so we were able to be joined by Brother Roland for the plurality of the show. Tomorrow night, of course, same time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard, you'll be able to tune in and bring the front. Tonight, the National Black United Front is beginning its conference here in Washington, D.C. So go online and check out NBUF. They've been around about 40 years in this reparations conference, among other things. I'm Greg Carr, sitting in this very big seat. And tune in tomorrow night for Brother Roland. And in the interim, if you're going to watch this show again, of course, watch it on all the digital platforms. And don't forget, support Roland Martin Unfiltered. This is Black Media Unfiltered, and you'll get it nowhere else. So with that, as Roland would say, holla.